and thank you everyone for joining in today. So welcome to this presentation on establishing measurable outcomes. So my name is Armin Karamanyan. I'm a research analyst in the research and evaluation team in the Office of the Superintendent. My colleague Geeta Bhagat and I will be guiding you through this presentation to help familiarize you with the significance of establishing measurable outcomes. So a little about our team, and apologies for those who took part in the training course yesterday. You'll have to hear this again. The information on our team may be useful to you for your future projects. The research and evaluation team are located at the Santa Clara County Office of Education's Ritter Park office. Our team works to support projects being administered by the Office of Education and involve any of the 33 school districts in the county. Our team assists in the planning stages of the project by ensuring the outcomes of the project are clear and measurable, by communicating the evaluation methods we plan to utilize and how they will help tell a story of the success or shortcomings of your project. The success of our work is relied upon by our stakeholders in order to help secure continued or future funding and demonstrate the change made by the project to various stakeholders. So in order to make our job possible and successful as researchers and to ensure the continuation of projects in support of students and educators, we rely on the development of strong research proposals when applying for a grant. For this reason, we hope today's session will help strengthen your understanding of one element of a research proposal. If throughout the presentation you have a question, please feel free to send a message, which my colleague Geeta will be monitoring, and we will aim to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So today's presentation is on establishing measurable outcomes, a crucial component of any project and detrimental to the success of any research grant. So I've noticed a few of our colleagues are joining in now. Apologies if there was any confusion with the link, but we're happy to have you on board for this establishing measurable outcomes presentation. So what are outcomes? Outcomes are the events, the occurrences, or changes in conditions behavior or attitudes that indicate progress towards a project's goals. Outcomes are, this is very important, specific, measurable, and meaningful. Outcomes are not activity-based, such as conducting 5 training workshops or building 20 wellness centers in a county or developing a new COVID testing protocol. These are outputs and do not reflect results achieved and will not demonstrate the value of the project itself. Rather, they are the activities or products of work that support the outcomes. Outputs are things that the project members have done, not changes that favorably affect outside beneficiaries. So what I hope we're going to take from this slide is that outputs and outcomes are not the same thing. Remember, outcomes are the reason why a thing is valuable to us. So all projects and programs should have goals and objectives that are subsequently translated into a set of measurable outcomes. These outcomes can then be monitored using quantitative or qualitative approaches. So we're talking about statistics or characteristics or subjective approaches to data analysis. Additionally, they should be used to track the project's progress through the grant period itself, guide any necessary changes, and evaluate its ultimate success at the end of the program year. As a research analyst in the research and evaluation team, I can tell you how much easier projects are for us to evaluate if they have measurable outcomes in the proposal. At times, if outcomes are not measurable, it is extremely difficult to assess the success of the project. Never underestimate how measurable outcomes work to secure grant funding. Spend time of this section of the grant proposal. Just because it gives you angst, don't put it off until the deadline looms, hoping for some last-minute wisdom. Don't treat the explanation of your program's measurable outcomes offhandedly or fail to give them careful attention. Well-defined outcomes are stated through a statement and will increase your chances of receiving funding for your program or your project. Grant reviewers understand that designing solid measurable outcomes are a key element in any successful program, as our colleague on the screen has discovered by the amount of money being thrown at her. So your outcome statement needs to include several things, and we have all this on the screen. Firstly, the who. Who will change as a result of the project? Organizations and communities can be the change target, but usually at an intermediate level, people will be the ones who change first. Second, what are the desired outcomes for the people or the organization? Describe the intended outcome in specific observable language, such as the knowledge, attitudes, and skills that you expect to change. Third, how is the performance measured? What tool or data collection method will be used to collect performance information? And from what source are you collecting the information and how often? This includes surveys, tests, interviews, and observations. Fourth, the target level of performance. What is the desired level of performance as evidence of success? And how much can you realistically achieve? Fifth, when should a desired performance be observed? Often this time frame is both short-term, as in annual, and long-term, as in strategic. And we'll cover this a bit later on as well. And lastly, why is the outcome addressed in this outcome statement important? What does it lead to? Start the measurable outcome section of the grant by stating the program goal, followed by an objective, and concluded with the measurable outcome itself. Clear objectives can help measure your outcomes. So never start your writing process by listing the outcome itself. Always start first with the program objectives and goals. So in addition to the components of a measurable outcome, and just so everyone knows, at the end, we're going to be actually providing you with some examples of measurable outcomes, and you will see all those different components in that statement. So in addition to these components, your outcome should also take into consideration something called SMARTY. So the first element of SMARTY is specific. So the outcome is well defined and clear to anyone with the program or project. In other words, it reflects what your organization seeks to accomplish. Second, your outcome should be measurable. So this should be concrete methods and criteria for assessing progress, achievements of the outcome itself. A reasonable person should be able to agree that the goal has been met. Third, attainable, but not simple. So what we mean by this is the goal will stretch you and your team members, but is reasonable given the program's resources and sphere of influence. Reasonable goals and objectives must be motivational and help incentivize program staff and stakeholders. And we'll get into this a bit more after, but the main thing to keep in mind is that your goals need to be, and your outcome needs to be achievable. Don't make it unrealistic. If you make it unrealistic, then you're kind of preparing yourself for failure. Then we have relevant or results oriented. The outcome must be relevant to the program's vision, mission, and responsibilities, and all people affiliated with the program. The outcomes must also be realistic and able to be tracked. And lastly, in this blue shade, we have time framed. The period of time for accomplishing the goal is reasonable given contextual constraints and includes a clear deadline. So previously, outcomes were decided around the SMART model, and many still are. However, the model did not address marginalized communities and the community as a whole. For this reason, we suggest adding 2 additional elements when writing up your outcome statement, and these are inclusivity and equity. And particularly for those staff who are joining us today who work for SCCOE, this is a real focus of our projects and our outcomes to be, of course, inclusive and equitable. So by inclusive, we mean bringing traditionally marginalized people, particularly those who are most impacted by the project we're working on, into processes, activities, and the decision policy-making process. In this way, inclusivity also means we're able to share power. And then we have equitable. So equity means seeking to address systematic injustice, inequity, or oppression. We strongly suggest you consider including inclusive and equitable when writing up your outcomes. By incorporating equity and inclusion into your SMART model and making it SMARTY, you can make sure your organization's commitment to racial equity and inclusion is anchored in tangible and actionable steps. Once you've listed your outcomes, you need to test to see if they actually work or are appropriate. And the way we test them is we need to find out if they support the program's objective. For example, if your program's objective is to ensure that students enrolled in an English language program demonstrate sufficient development in the English language by the 4th grade, you'll need to ensure your outcomes support this objective. Your outcome should not derail from the objective set by the program. It needs to focus on the 4th graders. It needs to focus on the development of the English language and ways in which that's tested. Second, is the outcome detailed enough and specific enough to be measured? Can your outcome be measured? Have you made clear which student base you'll be measuring? So as we said, the grade 4 students, for example, what test you'll be using to measure English language scores. So typically you might use, let's say, a state or federal based measurement system. And what standard you'll be measuring against. So we need to know, have you measured it against other standards used by other, let's say, districts, other programs or projects, in order to know whether your program itself is actually successful? And lastly, can the outcome be used to make decisions on how to improve the program? You want to develop an outcome statement that will allow you to improve the program based on future findings. Some good examples may be the elimination or creation of services offered by your program based on a measurable outcome, the reallocation of your project's resources, or the identification of new groups of people who require the service. So it's always useful when you're writing up your outcome statement to go back and see whether you can tick these 3 boxes. It's an exercise which, if you get yourself used to, it'll kind of become second nature when you're writing up future outcome statements. So I've spoken enough. I'll now pass it over to my colleague Geeta to provide some helpful terms to use when writing your outcome statement and some examples of outcome statements. So over to you, Geeta.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're now going to talk about some terms to use when writing about outcomes. When writing your outcome statement, consider using the following terms: produce, identify, increase, improve, solve, illustrate, interpret, report, review, classify, translate. These are specific words that work well when describing your outcome statement rather than being too broad. The following terms are not recommended as they are open to interpretation, not quantifiable and too general. Know, organize, understand, really understand, fully appreciate, have an awareness of. Now let's go over an example of an outcome statement together. Let's say the goal of the project is to help kindergarten to 5th grade students read better. The objective of the project is the creation of an after-school reading program to assist more than 50 children. The output would be the creation of the after-school reading program, but what about the outcome? The outcome is the improvement of reading scores by 1 grade level, as seen on standardized tests given after 6 months of participation. The outcome statement above is a measurable statement that lets you know that you have reached your goal. It lets us know the target group, the standard with which it is measured, and a realistic time frame. When developing your outcome statement, remember to always use a SMARTY tool to ensure your outcomes are realistic. At times, the outcomes people set to achieve are either too difficult to achieve or too easy. If the bar you are setting for your outcome is too low, it will be uninspiring for those who are helping you. And if it's too high, then the team helping you out will think it's unachievable and won't be committed to achieving your goals. Also, be sure to give your team enough time to achieve the outcome. Rather than set commitments for 90 days, try and see if your plan will work for you if you set a 9-month time frame. This will allow your team and yourself to set more aggressive goals. Another important tip is to make sure you understand past trends related to the outcome you are hoping to achieve. By understanding what has happened in the past and outcomes of past projects, you will be able to develop more realistic outcomes. So example 1, 100 homeless clients will receive services through the program. Of those, 60 will receive counseling and assistance in increasing self-sufficiency and becoming contributive and productive members of society. Of the homeless persons in our program, 60 will receive counseling and assistance in increasing self-sufficiency and becoming contributing and productive members of society. And of those, 10 will secure paid employment within 3 months of completion of the counseling services. So let's compare these examples that are good and those that need improvement. The first statement reads that 100 homeless clients will receive services through the program. Of those, 60 will receive counseling and assistance. This outcome statement does not define a measurable outcome. Instead, it defines services that are to be offered. But what outcomes are actually to be expected from the counseling services? Will any clients actually become contributing members of society as a result of the counseling? Can you go back to the other slide, Orman? I'm sorry. The second statement is an example, a better example of a better approach. Of the homeless persons in our program, 60 will receive counseling and assistance in increasing self-sufficiency and becoming contributing and productive members of society. And of those, 17% of 60 will secure paid employment within 3 months of completion of the counseling services. The next slide, please. So here's example 2. For the second example, we have the following outcome statement. 120 children will receive after-school cooking instruction, and of these, 60 will demonstrate improved grades at the end of the school year. Although these do set desired outcomes from the services, how can we know that any improvements in grades of self-confidence are the result of the cooking classes? Maybe the students who aren't in after-school classes would show similar improvements. The challenge with a program such as this is to have methods of measurement that clearly and reliably reliably link the results to the program. Sometimes this is very hard to do. One thing that could establish this link is a large-scale academic study that demonstrates that similar after-school programs in other schools have resulted in similar measurable objectives. Once again, you can see how the outcome will be measured in the desired performance time frame. This will be important to measurable outcomes you set. This does not mean you need to conduct the large-scale studies of after-school programs, but by having an understanding of past trends and research conducted in this area, you will be able to justify your findings through a comparison with existing research. Before we conclude the presentation, we'd like to answer any questions. I don't see any in the chat. Does anybody have a question they'd like to send in the chat? For those of you who are interested in learning more about the SMARTY matrix and having a go at completing SMARTY goals worksheet, the link on the slide will direct you to the SMARTY matrix website. There is a Word document version of the matrix which you can use when completing your next proposal. And I will copy and paste this for you. Armin, it's not letting me copy and paste. Can you see if you can?
It's okay. I can see if I can do it. It might be easier. Okay, so link sent.
Okay, great. Also, if you would like to send us any questions relating to this course, please do so at the following email address. You can contact any of us at these addresses. And we'd also like to request that you take a moment to complete the post-training survey using the tiny URL link in the slide. And it looks like Armin has already pasted it. Thank you. So thank you for taking part in the Measurable Outcomes workshop, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you everyone for taking part.